It is a country once forbidden, but not forgotten. It is a people forever changed by their past. It is magical. It is haunting. It is Vietnam. October Films is proud to present, for the first time ever, an American film made entirely in Vietnam. An intimate story. An epic film about three people trying to find their place in a world that changes like the seasons. Starring Harvey Keitel.
I've made many mistakes in my life. That was a long time ago. And I'm not the same man I was then. A lot of time has passed. When a chance comes around to make a wrong a right, it's a special thing. I hope to make one thing right.
3 seasons. A film by Tony Bui.
Hi everyone, welcome to Carolyn Talks. This is the podcast / YouTube channel where I, your host, Carolyn Hines, film critic and journalist, speak to film creatives around the world about their work, the industry, and what inspires them. And today, I'm very happy to be joined by filmmaker Tony Bui to talk about his film 3 Seasons, which is a multi-award winning film. And it also is, I was doing some research on it, it's also a very special film because it was the first American Vietnamese film to be made in Vietnam after the embargo lifted in 1995. So the film was released in 1999, but it was like, that's a very special accomplishment. So just congrats on that alone, Tony.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. And so the film also was one of the first, I think it's the first film to win at Sundance, the Audience Award and the Grand Jury Prize Award there. And it's basically about 4 characters. There is Han, who is a cycle rider, which is kind of like a bicycle rider who transports people around. Woody, a young boy who sells like trinkets to tourists and locals. And I want to make sure I get her name correctly. And Kian An, who's harvests lotus flowers, and James, played by Harvey Keitel. So these 4 characters, their lives don't immediately intersect, which I like about this film, because normally when you have a film where you have multiple characters whose lives intersect, it starts very early in the film or midway. But for this one, the characters, their lives intersect kind of like gradually. It's like this gradual natural progression. And the film talks a lot about the Westernization of Ho Chi Minh City, otherwise known as Saigon, at this very pivotal time in the country's history. So, Tony, first of all, I want to ask you about just coming up with the characters themselves, because each character is very distinct. They're different genders, male and female, but they're also very different ages. So, because Woody's a child, like 9, 10, and then the oldest person is James, and he's in his he would have been in his 50s, early 50s at this point in time. So talk to me first about developing the characters.
Yeah, I mean, the developing of the characters actually came very organically because it came from a lot of my travels to Vietnam in the mid to late 90s. So a lot of the characters, you see in there are characters that I witnessed. The dialogue in the film, was dialogue that I actually heard spoken on the streets. And I was going to Vietnam a lot during that time. I was keeping a diary. I was writing down everything I would see. And Vietnam was going through this transition period as the embargo was lifted and normalization occurred. And from 1995 on, when America and Vietnam renewed it, renewed its relationship. And what we saw was Vietnam started to Westernize very quickly. And with a lot of corporations, companies coming in, a lot of deals being made, a lot of business. So in many ways, it was good for the country in the sense that there was a lot of money coming in and a lot of development, which was hindered from, years of the embargo. But what was interesting to me was in the news, it focused on a lot of the politicians, the business leaders, and the people who gained, I think, the most from this. And what was lost in the conversations were a lot of the people who I think, live between the shadows of these buildings. So the kind of metaphor I use is, as the higher the hotels get, the longer the shadows. And so my film is really about the people who live within these shadows. That's actually a line in the film as well. And so the film, covers that Westernization, but I wanted to tell a story that wasn't just sort of straight on. It wasn't a documentary. So I wanted to tell a story through, which why it has this kind of almost like, almost like fable-like quality, and sort of this magical realism and sort of a style that I really like. So, so then the characters kind of happened sort of organically from there. And to be honest, I originally wanted to tell the story of just a sickle driver. Then I was like, no, then I want to tell the story of just a lotus picker, as a separate film. And then I realized that I don't know if I'm going to be able to get to that many all those films. And that's when I decided to, it's better just to intertwine them up and tell this sort of this bigger story. And and through this sort of intersection of lives, we paint hopefully a bigger fabric of what was going on during that time period.
Yeah, and I think that's important that you did that because, as you said, you wanted to do like different films about different characters, but I think it was actually great that you included all of them in one, because a city is made up of different people. It's made up of people of different ages, whether they're babies, toddlers, teenagers, people in their 40s or 50s, or even like in their 70s, 80s. Like a city is made up of that. The culture is made up of that, and each person has their role within the society and within the city and how it functions. And this film shows you how like these characters all really just come together and show like how they themselves contribute to this the country, to the society, to the fabric of the city. And it's very interesting because like for me, I think my favorite character would of course be Kian, but I think also Lan, who's the call girl. And they're interesting to me because not only because they're women, but we are showing like two different aspects of female lives in Vietnam and Ho Chi Minh City at that point in time. You have Lan, who's the call girl, and she served, and her main clientele would be American GIs, or like the businessmen coming in who are now looking to invest in Vietnam. The hotels, the companies, the trade companies, all those different things. And then there's Kian, who is she's more a bit more naive, because she comes straight from the country and her job is to like harvest the lotus flowers and sell them in the city. But they're both experiencing the same thing, where they're realizing Westernization is impacting their lives very specifically as women. And Lan, I want to talk about Lan first because she catches my eye immediately because from the onset, her outfits are very different. And the introduction to her is she's running from these men from a hotel, and people would assume they're her pimps perhaps, but I get the sense she doesn't have pimps because I think she works for herself. But she's wearing this white top and a yellow skirt. And that catches my eye not because she stands out amidst everyone else in the scene. Like everyone is wearing more like neutral colors. The city is more neutral because it's hazy because of the weather. But right before we see her, the women at the lotus field in the lotus garden are singing a song about lotus flowers. And they're talking about how the petals of the flowers are white and the centers are yellow and their stems are green. And like when I saw her, I was like, oh, she's a lotus flower. She represents that within the film. And she wears this outfit in similar colors throughout the film, but these light dreamy colors. So talk to me at first about her, particularly as a character and her costuming. And I think her representing the lotus flowers is a symbol of Vietnam. But then in doing my research, I found that your first short film was called The Yellow Lotus. So I wanted to ask you like about the tying about lotus and what that means to you personally, as not only as a Vietnamese-American, but as a filmmaker.
Yeah, so my short's called Yellow Lotus, and it's really the precursor to 3 Seasons. A lot of what I was explaining earlier, but what I was witnessing, what I was seeing from the street kids, the sickle drivers, to these call girls, and I was hearing a lot of these, whether there are stories that I heard directly or people telling me some of these, stories of people who they interacted with, and I was learning a lot. So then I went out and did further research, and I would run into people like James Hager, the Harvey Keitel character, and literally almost every scene you see in the film, something that I've either witnessed myself or, or had conversations with people about. And so they're all, rooted in something that's really authentic. And and some of them I turn to sort of, I played out on symbolism, metaphor a little bit more. So they're not so, it's not like a direct portrayal, but, because I wanted to, make it a little more creative and use a little more of a sort of a subjective sort of look into something that, rather than just purely objective. But, to answer your question about Lon standing out, that is, first of all, I just want to say it's very perceptive. A lot of people ask me questions, but they don't go into that much depth, so I really appreciate the fact that you actually watched it, read up on it, and put thought into sort of the especially the visual choices, which I appreciate a lot, because I think about that a lot when I write. I'm a very visual writer and filmmaker. But if you notice, so Lon really stands out, through her clothing, without a doubt. We spent a lot of time, thinking about that. I spent a lot of time I wrote it, thinking about that. And this idea of someone who is sort of caught between two worlds. In one way, she's Vietnamese, but another way, she really wants to be part of this Western world. She thinks that's what's gonna save her, free her. She talks about wanting to have one full night there. She talks about wanting to live within the worlds of the people who live within the hotels. So basically, she divides it as the people who live outside the hotels and the people who actually can live inside the hotels. And remember, there's a time period when hotels started to pop up, like, all over Vietnam. And literally there were like cranes and hotels just everywhere when you go around the city. And so it became this sort of largely, imposing structure that a lot of people had to navigate across through, under, but very few of the people who cross it actually get to be inside of it. So there's this whole almost mythology about, what these hotels at that time period represented, and the ooh and the ah of it all. So she kind of represents all that with her clothes and what she thinks would be, would allow her to sort of attract the kind of men who would go into these hotels and fit in that world. But with Lon, on the surface, she's sort of a country girl coming in doing this work, but she still stands out. She stands out with her music, because there's a set pattern in how these women, these workers, would sing, and that's a tradition that you find in a lot of and it's not just the lotus fields, but also a lot of agricultural fields, people working to do their songs, native songs, and this field, they have their songs that the old women like to sing, and she comes in and she sings a different song, and that disrupts things. And in a way, they're both disruptors, right? And they're both coming in and changing things. So with Lon, it's reflected through her clothing, without a doubt. But then that clothing transforms along the way, until something else by the end. And then with Kien An, the Lotus Picker, her music becomes the thing that antagonizes, but then later on becomes something that heals. I don't want to give away the film, but so the thing that separates them is the very thing that transforms them and transforms the people around them.
Yeah, and I love that these two women, like, they get their own way of healing themselves, because society can take so much from women. Westernization, it can actually take so much from women. Capitalism can take so much from women. But even in the midst of all of this, like, they found ways to heal themselves and found ways for people to reach out to them and to, like, offer them a method of healing. Like for Kien An, she has like teacher Dao, who reads her poetry and lets her become his hands. She transcribes his poetry for him, and that gives her a voice in a way that she didn't have before. She has her singing, but that gives her a way to show, like, I can do this. I can do more than what people assume I am capable of. And for Lan, like, she finds healing because someone believes that she's more than she believes herself to be. She's more than society, that other men have told her that she is, and that allows her to get in contact. I think not contact with herself as a person, but also as a Vietnamese woman in particular. She realizes, yes, Westernization has its benefits, but that doesn't have to mean that you have to strip away everything that makes you you. That doesn't have to strip away your identity. And in talking about the hotels, like, I'm from the Caribbean, I'm from Barbados, so I'm very familiar with the themes in this film about the higher hotels go, like the longer the bigger the shadow they cast. And in Barbados, it's not quite the same as in other areas because we're very flat islands. Our hotels aren't that high. I think they're capped at, like, I think 10 floors just because of the topography. But as a child and even as an adult, when I lived there, we always fantasize what it was like being in the hotels, about going to dinner, like sleeping in the hotel rooms, and the only way you could be in a hotel is if you work there, and like that was the only way we got access to these extremely expensive places that are on our land, like we are barred from it. And even when I grew up, I worked in the tourism industry, and I started to work in hotels, I saw the inner workings, and it kind of dispelled a lot of my misconceptions about it, because it is not as grand as it's portrayed and people believe, but you know, you still feel special about it. And like as locals, sometimes some hotels would offer like special packages like during the off season where you could stay for like a weekend and you feel so grand because you're like, oh, I got to stay at this fancy hotel. And it's weird that you think that, and it's weird that we think that way within our own country, you know. And so like when the scene between Hai and his and the other guy who rides the cycle talked to have that discussion, it was like, yeah, I've had that same discussion with people back home in Barbados, and I've heard people talking about it, and it's still prevalent in the Caribbean. That's something I think it wrong, not only in tourist countries, but we're former colonies, you know, like we have this where we have this.
What you're saying is so right on, and so perceptive. And again, this is such an interesting conversation. And it still goes on in Vietnam today. When you see a lot of the young people in Vietnam, the hospitality sort of industry is huge. A lot of them want to work in the hotels, and for all the reasons you just said, but also it's a chance for them to speak English and interact in a way that they think has this grandeur to it, you know. And they think that this is, you know, a lot of them, they may think they never will be able to get out. You know, in my film, it's really about getting into the hotel, getting into that room. And in a way, today in Vietnam, it's about, you know, you work in these hotels so that you can one day maybe get to the West. You know what I mean? It's all about these micro steps to get to this place that they have in their mind that is, you know, in some part truth and some parts overly romanticized, that there's something greater. You know, that's like the end of the rainbow over there, you know, and the West represents that. So in the beginning it was just getting into the hotels. Well, Vietnam's to the point now where you can get into the hotels. Now it's about, if you work in the hotels, it might get you to work for the company in a hotel that's outside of Vietnam. And then you eventually work your way to the West. You know, that's that sentiment's still there. It's just kind of expanded a little bit. You know? But you're very perceptive in what you said, because it's very true that this happens a lot in former colonies. This is something that, you know, in many ways, you know, these nations, you know, fight really hard to push out the colonial power, but there's still a fascination. There's still something that's tethered that can never be let go. Vietnam's, you know, cuisine, its architecture, some of its educational system is still very tethered to, you know, the French colonies, and it's something that it's part of the DNA of Vietnam. You know, Vietnam was a French colony for over 100 years, so it's something that you know, I mean, that's going to be there forever. But that feeling of somehow the other side is going to be better, and that other side always represents that Western former colonial powers, to me, is very fascinating.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me too, because I've been living here in Canada since 2009. And again, like the preconceptions that I had about Canada and North America are were dispelled very quickly, you know, because like when you watch these films, you know, like these Hollywood movies, they sell us a very particular idea of what America is, what Canada is, you know, the American dream. You know, they talk about the streets are paved with gold. You can achieve anything, you can be anything you want to be. Then you get here and you realize, no, it's actually it's much harder, not only to be what you want to be, but just to survive, you know. Like it's not very easy for immigrants, especially people from and even when I say immigrants, I gotta be specific and say immigrants of color, because European immigrants are not treated the way that immigrants of color from former colonies in particular, and from like Africa and other Asian countries are treated. You know, like a lot of people don't even look at European immigrants as immigrants. Whereas, you know, and so there's that whole dichotomy. And even in the film, like the people who, like the Americans who moved to Vietnam, they wouldn't even be seen as immigrants, you know, like they're just seen, they would be called expats, you know, or they'd be just say, oh, you're just moving here for things. But I'm like, you're actually an immigrant, but that identity is never given to them. And talking about that, I want to talk now about James and Woody, because they're interesting, because same way how I see Kian and Lan as kind of like very similar, James is interesting to me because he's a former GI and he's in Vietnam because he's looking for his daughter that he and he's looking for a daughter that he found out about after her mother died, which was very common, not only in Vietnam. You can find it happening across Africa, across Asia, across Europe, and even the Caribbean, where former military personnel from other countries the men would move there, impregnate the women, and skedaddle, you know. And so he's there and he's looking for this daughter he doesn't know. And Woody is a child, and he has this interaction not with Woody, but this other little girl at the beginning of the film where I'm like, he's looking for a daughter he doesn't know. And I was thinking in my head, but Woody is right there. And the way he treats Woody isn't the way he would treat his daughter, and I was thinking you were looking for this daughter that you want to treat also well, but another Vietnamese child is right there, and you're not treating him the way you would treat your daughter. Like he encourages him to drink. He'll say basically, no one here cares about you, so I'm gonna let you drink this alcohol. He even tries to bargain with him for this lighter, and I'm like, you're not. So talk to me about James and Woody, because Woody he's a very mature child, but that's because he's forced to mature. And James is looking for a child that he doesn't know, and he's trying to contend with this past that he kind of ignored for too long. So talk to me about Woody and James. And getting Harvey Keitel, because I was like, I thought getting Harvey Keitel for that film was actually a very interesting choice, considering some of the films that he did before. I was like,
So yes, the character Woody, is it's less so now, but at that time period, you see kids like this all the time. They're street kids, they're street urchins, they're going out selling trinkets. Again, when you go to Vietnam today, there isn't as much of this anymore. Unless you go into maybe some of the rural areas or maybe some of the smaller towns. But Saigon at the time, there was all these kids running around, selling these all the time. And they would sleep on the sidewalks and the alleys, wake up and go sell. And usually there's some sort of master or, father-like figure. So, who sort of was sort of the leader of all these kids running around selling stuff. And so the scenes in there that I put in there were scenes that I witnessed. I spent a lot of time.
This film is practically an autobiography for you, isn't it?
I mean, I spent a lot of time, I was, a filmmaker, an artist. These changes in Vietnam that were happening was so massive for me. But you have to understand, it was also a time of identification for me too, because I was born in Vietnam, but I left when I was a year old. I grew up in America. Then I went back to Vietnam, and when I was 19, and I started witnessing these changes as I myself was connecting with the country. So because of that, I think I was so open to absorb all the little nuances, because I wasn't just coming as a tourist. I wasn't just coming as like my fifth or sixth time, or been in Vietnam many times. And I think many ways, I was my sense of perception was so heightened because I was absorbing so much and with every visit. I would spend like summers there and more. Every chance I got during the college breaks, I would fly there and spend time there. A lot of times I spent it by myself. I was just basically on a motorbike, just riding around. And because I was a college kid, broke, I would spend a lot of time with the people in this movie, almost, in the beginning by circumstance, because I didn't have the money to stay in the fancy hotels myself, So, and then, but also those are the people who, I think just the people who I gravitated towards, because those are the people who I found the most interesting, people I spent the most time talking to. But these street kids, all these characters are really composite characters. It wasn't like one character with someone I know. In the street kids, really a composite character of multiple kids like this who I spent time with that I knew. And so Woody became sort of the embodiment of many of these kids. Even the scene where like they're playing soccer in the rain, the car goes by, like I literally witnessed that like multiple times. And then, I mean, literally it's exactly like that. And wrote that into the film. But for Woody, he represents something that, to me, his entire life, like we were saying earlier, all the characters are about characters who, live within the shadows of this sort of, Western penetration, if you will. It's like in a way, Vietnam, try to keep it out, and then with the normalization, lifting the embargo, there was this mad rush, and so, in the city of Saigon, the country changed rapidly. And Woody represents the kid who, again, he's on the outside. He's selling a lot, these trinkets and lighters and other knickknacks to people who are coming out of the hotels. But he himself has a fascination. I think there's a scene in the beginning where he goes into, he's following one of the potential customers, and he ends up in the hotel, and he's sort of in all the lights and the shiny chandelier and all that, and but Woody to me sort of represents the that transition from a different point of view. And that's why I think doing this kind of a story where there are multiple threads allows me to hit different notes, and to cast a wider net. And so with Woody, I was able to do something where it was more just sort of through his eyes, through losing the case and having to find it over this one night, he takes us through the world of Saigon at night, through there's a scene where through the bars, of course, and the rain, and there's a scene where he's sitting with all the television sets, and or meeting with the little girl with the cans, and it's basically just taking us through his world. And for that, it was more just showing the visuals of Saigon at the time, and letting that world sort of, letting us sort of be pulled into that world through Woody's search himself of his own case, and it's almost his entire livelihood is dependent on these trinkets, which are really Western trinkets,
Yeah.
And they're all sort of, all their lives are intertwined by it somehow. With Lana's obvious, but even with Kinan, when she has her flowers and she sells these real flowers, and her work is disrupted because she finds out there's someone else selling these fake flowers, and this idea of fake flowers that smell like the real thing but last longer, and there's sort of metaphors to that with what's going on with the country in the city. So, and with him, his livelihood is selling not only to the Western world, but also selling Western trinkets, so it's all kind of embedded in that. And so they're all tethered to the Western world in one way or another, but at the same time, disrupted by it. And even the scene where, he's, when he loses his case, he's still a kid, so he's playing, and he ends up behind the movie theater, and the film that's playing is this sort of, the classic Western film, and you don't get more Western than the Western genre, and basically, it's sort of a cowboy sort of Western movie, and he tears through that screen, which is sort of, a metaphor for sort of what was going on in his life, and the disruption of his life, and this need to be a part of something to survive, but not, it's almost like you're chasing it all the time, but you're never quite there. And that's something that all these characters are doing in one way or another. And then James, as the sole sort of American Western character in the film, represents a different, they're all just going through it. They're all searching for something, obviously. And for him, it's like the other characters are dealing with one connection to the West, and he's dealing with a connection of a past, and in a sense, all the other characters are dealing with the present and the future, and he's trying to sort of tie up a past. And it's how the West dealt with Vietnam from, at that point, 20, 25 years ago. And so he's on this search for the dollar that he never knew, left behind. And in a sense, it's through his character, he's trying to make peace for himself, but in a sense, it's and I saw this a lot with a lot of vets who came back, and they all were coming back to try to find some peace, try to make some sense of what happened, because it was a chaotic time. And his life, in a sense, has been disrupted for long time. And part of his journey back to Vietnam is to find some sense of peace, to try to find some way to stop that disruption, if you will. And so his journey is about finding a way to mend what the things that ripped him apart from the past. And the thing that ripped him apart is this sort of clash between the West and Vietnam. And these characters are being sort of ripped apart at the moment. So anyway, so these are sort of the thematic things I was thinking of at the time. And I thought that there wasn't one single story that said it all. That's what I realized. I had to tell all the stories together. and all the stories, different parts, and collectively together, hopefully it gives an audience a sort of bigger feel of through many vantage points of what was going on at the time.
No, I think you did a fantastic job because, like, as I said, me being for the Caribbean, I'm someone who can relate to like the themes that you put in the film and to the different characters. Like, Hyde, for instance, he's the cycle driver, and because he's mobile, his job is to move all over the city. He gets to see all these different people, and he's getting to see the city and the people change in a way that other people can't. Like for Lan, his first interaction with her is she's running, and like he fulfills her dream of just being able to rest, like going into a hotel room, enjoying air condition and just sleep. Because she's always like, or like she's never had a moment of peace. And so he provides that for her. And the reason he's able to provide that for her is because he listens to her. He has all these people that he's transporting, and he listens to her, and he watches how the city changes. And so like there was a film that I know we're gonna have to wrap it soon. So there was a film that I actually did an interview with for a filmmaker. Her name is Yuan Hong An, and it's for a short film called Saigon Kiss. And the film and I kind of see your films would work as a double feature in a way, because your film kind of talks about how Vietnam was changing right at the moment as the change began. And her film is kind of showing how Vietnam is now, in Saigon. And it's kind of interesting to see how much of the city has changed, but also things that hasn't changed. It's still almost in a state of transition. Like there's the old and the new struggling together. Like Vietnam is like, it's super bustling. Like your film, I noticed there's not that many motorcycles on the street compared to how much are on the street now. There's millions of motorcycles on the street now, and people are still bustling and hustling, and they're still going. And Vietnam is interesting because it has like the old European French sort of architecture, traditional architecture, but then also the new modern like glass buildings and stuff. And it kind of even shows how Westernization in a way always kind of suppresses. It even suppresses older forms of Westernization, and like even like if I use Scarborough as an example, we got all these ugly houses. I call them shoebox houses, where they're so hideous. They're all square boxes. They're all built in a square, and they're supposed to be considered modern architecture. But I'm like, these things are hideous, but they're cropping up more and more, and you're seeing them to overtake other forms of architecture to be considered modern at that time. And I find like that both Saigon Kiss and your film kind of made me think of that, of how Westernization is always mainly more about suppressing, even if it's like suppresses itself, it kind of cannibalizes whatever environment is propping up on. And so for my last question, I want to ask you, and looking back,
I want to interrupt you real quick. You said something, because again, it's super perceptive, is that the idea of Hai, the cycle driver, going around, because his job is to basically transport people, and he's always behind them. So he's a listener and he's a watcher. And because of that, he's always like the invisible person that you don't really think is there, because his job is to, in a way, be invisible, just transport the person who's supposed to be the important person from one place to another. So, but he's the one who's always watching, listening, seeing, right? And in a way, it kind of mirrors like, even like the taxi drivers in other cities. The taxi driver is someone who just drives people around. You don't think he's there, but he's the one who listens to everyone's conversation in the back, right? He knows what's going on. He has his finger on the pulse of what's going on in the city. He's hearing everyone's conversations. So that's the same thing. It's the same thing with the cycle driver. And so anyways, I just want to throw that in there.
No, it's right. And I think those kind of people, not only people like who do like people basically who work in the service industry, whether it's in hospitality, whether it's in a hotel, a hospital, a taxi driver, rickshaw driver, or what have you. They're the ones who really know what's going on, because no one pays them attention. So people feel comfortable saying things that they never say to other people. If you want gossip, if you want to know what's really happening, go and talk to the maid. If you want to know.
Absolutely. For the longest time here in New York, you would have the the elevator, the guy who transports.
The elevator operators. There's a word for them, but I can't remember what they're called.
I can't remember, the elevator operator or something like, and but it's those guys, right? Those guys, you never know their face, you don't know what they look like. You basically go in, like the fourth floor, and they, they pull the lever for you and stuff like that. The other ones who actually listens to everyone's conversations, knows what's going on, and I was talking to a journalist recently, and we're talking about my current film and how I do research for it. And as a journalist, when he and he does the kind of work that he does, is he has to go into a lot of foreign countries and look for certain things and research certain things. and he says the person he always goes to try to, if he needs to know what's going on or to find something and to get help, you know, he always goes to the people we're talking about, the people who you would consider invisible, to ask their opinions, ask, you know, what they think, to see where things might be, because they're the ones who actually pay attention the most and know the most. So, you know, this idea of the invisible people is very interesting to me. In a way, that's what I was trying to do with this film. I was trying to highlight the people who would be mostly invisible, you know, like the field worker, the cyclo driver, you know, the street urchin, you know what I mean? So these are, you know, and so anyways, I thought that was really interesting, because it really is. The ones who are the most forgotten are the ones who, in a sense, you know, knows the most of what's going on.
And they're the one who understands it, because in talking about that, there's a scene with Hai and like his other friend, like when they're talking about the hotel, well, he and also Hai and Lance are impressed by the hotels, like, you know, they dream of all of this. Hai isn't, and the reason he isn't impressed by it is because he hears what the people says. He's like, these people are nothing to admire, you know. He knows the deals, and he's like, these things that are happening aren't helpful to us. He sees it, which is like when he goes and buys Keon's flowers, he sees like these plastic flowers coming in, which are being sold as better, aren't better because they're putting people like her out of work, you know. And it's like you're replacing the real beauty with a fake beauty, and while it may last, it doesn't have that soul, you know. You know, it doesn't give you the feeling that a real flower would give. And so like that's going to take to my last question. So because this film was released in 1999, years ago, the year before I left secondary school. But so many years have passed, and the world has changed, and Vietnam has changed, and you have changed. Like, because the film is showing now again, basically as a retrospective at the festival, what have you been able to take away from the film now that you weren't able to take away at the time it was released? Like, you're older, mature, you know, you're more sure of yourself as a filmmaker. You're even making now a film. I was doing research. You were doing preparing for the film based on the picture called Napalm Girl, which is one of the most famous pictures ever. And you're doing a film about that. And again, that is about Vietnam's history, which was and during I don't even like to say the Vietnamese War. I like to say the war in Vietnam, because America's part in that is like a whole thing. But what has changed for you over the years, and being able to look back at this film now with new eyes and more mature eyes and say, wow, like this is what has it changed for you, not only about yourself, but about Vietnam?
That's a really good question. You know, when the film, you know, the reason why this film got restored and has this new life is actually because the Sundance Film Festival this year chose as one of 10 films to represent its 40 years. So they were celebrating 10 films. My film got chosen as one of them, and I got the call, but I didn't have a way to show it because I only had it on celluloid. I didn't even have a digital version of the film. So I had to go through this. So anyways, I jump kicked this whole, you know, frantic, you know, I've always wanted to restore it, but it costs a lot of money, and there needs to be a reason and all that kind of stuff. So when Sundance really gave me the reasons. I was able to go to people and get donors and people and talk to people. Okay, we have to put money into restoring this because Sundance wants to play it. But so when it played at Sundance, I had really not seen the film in a long, long time. And you know, I think one way to answer your question is having not only has time passed since I made it, but time passed also since I've seen it with an audience, and sit down and watch it all the way through with an audience. Something interesting happened, and that is because so much time had passed, and I actually forgotten about the film, that for the first time I was able to watch it like an audience member, not just as a filmmaker. So when you watch as a filmmaker, all you do is see all the problems, right? You're like, oh, I should have done that shot better. I should have done another extra take there. I wish I would have, you know, put more time here, or you know, choose a different location. You know, you think about all kinds of things that you could have done better. And but then all that went out the window. I literally watched it as an audience member, and I even forgot what scenes was going to come next, you know, because it's so much time, you know. And it was such a emotional, beautiful experience. On one hand, I was like actually surprised. I was like, oh my God, how did they make that film? You know, because, you know, it's a complicated film to make. And today, honestly, I would probably be scared to make that film on the budget that we made it for. But the thing that I was really proud of is that the themes that, you know, I explored in that film are still relevant today. and still relevant, I think, for a lot of nations, especially nations that are, in transition, that are changing and trying to find its identity by, especially nations that are opening up and having, a lot of different influences from outside coming in.
Mm.
And that's the thing, it's, I was really proud of that. I was writing about characters and dealing with themes that were truly universal and still have weight today, meaning that it's still important. The conversations that these characters are having, characters like that today are still having, but just a little bit different. It could be a little bit on a larger scale. Like I was saying earlier, it might not be, let me see how I can get into a hotel, but now it's gonna be, let me see how I can get into a hotel so I can get into the hotel outside of Vietnam, to the Western world, or whatever it is. You know what I mean? So, but also it's we don't, on the surface, there are some real changes. Like, let's say those cyclo drivers don't exist that much in Vietnam anymore, unless you go out to the village. But in the main parts of Saigon, Hanoi, you rarely see them. And sometimes they only exist now more for novelty's sake, for tourists and stuff like that. But back then it was a real way of transportation. But that sentiment is still there. And you still see that, and you still see that gap between the people who can be in the nice restaurants or be in the nice hotels or be in the, people who are included and people who are not. And that's something that the city and the people are still grappling with. So in a way, when you ask me, like, seeing it now as a different person many years later, on one hand, I was able to enjoy the film, just as a piece of film, which was amazing to me. But secondly, I think I'm just most proud because it wasn't like any big aha, like different, like, oh my God, I see something different. It was more just, oh my God, the things that we explored still exist today, are still relevant, still need to be explored. And these conversations continue on. I think one of the proudest things was some people saw the film and came up to me and said, oh, this film could have, it could have been made as if it was like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Because it's still important and it still has impact. And that to me is something that's incredibly satisfying.
Yeah, we have to wrap it now, but I agree completely. The film it would honestly be considered a timeless film, and the reason for that is because the themes are still very prevalent. The themes are still very much existing with us for in today. Because, like, for instance, I was thinking of a film that I saw last year at TIFF called A Road to a Village, and it's a Nepalese film, and it is about Westernization, how Westernization is now beginning to affect the people in Nepal, because they got the commercialization coming in, and they're contending with keeping up with their culture and like holding on to their ethnic traditions, while also wanting to seem more forward thinking and progressive and modern. So, like, these things are still very much happening today. And even when I went back home to Barbados a couple of years ago, like, there's still things that we're still being told, like, to be seen as progressive and modern. You just have to accept certain Western, North American, and European ideals. And so, like, your film was released in 1999, but I'm like, yeah, the themes are still very, like, topical for today. So and I think that's a great honor to you, because as a filmmaker, like, you made a film that isn't, I would say it's not gonna age, and it doesn't feel dated. Like, it doesn't feel dated to me. It might seem dated because with regards to, like, the different signs that show, like, where would you go to see a Maxwell sign now? But it doesn't feel dated with regards to, like, nothing that the characters here do feels old. It feels like something like they would have the conversations about, like we are having today. So, like, that's a great credit to you, and, like, congratulations. And I was actually at Sundance and I wanted to see it there and I didn't, so I got to see it for here. So now
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. That was amazing. Thank you for the conversation. It's actually really amazing. I think your insights into things has made this conversation different than when I normally answer questions. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'm happy that it was done. So I'm happy that you're happy. And that's always I try to do for my interviews. But I wish we had more time, because I want to ask you about changing from cellular to digital, but we don't. So but congratulations, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your festival.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, Tony.